In January of 2026, a 75-year-old man inside a quiet home in Grand Blanc, Michigan, ended his own life. To the people who knew him, he was a friendly neighbor, a gifted musician, and a family man who wore a bright smile almost everywhere he went. He believed the worst thing he had ever done would stay buried with him. It did not. During his autopsy, investigators quietly collected a sample of his DNA. Within days, that single sample answered a question that had haunted one Michigan family for 43 years. A teenage girl had left home for her school bus stop in 1983 and never came back. For decades, no one knew who took her. The man responsible had been living openly the entire time. Only a few counties away, hiding in the middle of an ordinary life that no one thought to question. The story opens on the cold morning of November 16, 1983. Sheri Jo Elliott was 16 years old, a high school student who lived on Seneca Street in West Flint, Michigan. Sometime between 6 and 6:30 that morning, she stepped outside to walk to her bus stop. It was a short, familiar route, one she had taken many times before. She never reached the bus. She never reached her classroom. As the hours passed with no sign of her, her family began to understand that something had gone badly wrong. And the particular dread that comes with a missing child crept into the house. What none of them could know yet was how long that dread would last, or how far she had already been carried from the street she knew. 4 days later, on November 20th, the search reached its worst possible end. Her body was discovered in a drainage ditch along Muller Road in Blumfield Township in Saginaw County. That spot sat well outside Flint, in a rural stretch of farmland that few local people had any reason to visit. It was Sheri Jo. The distance between the place she disappeared and the place she was found told investigators something disturbing from the start. Whoever took her had access to a vehicle, knew the back roads well, and had time on his side. This was no impulsive act committed in a panic. Someone had planned, transported, and concealed. And the findings from the medical examination, still to come, would push the case into even darker territory than the location alone suggested. The autopsy revealed a sequence of events that unsettled even seasoned investigators. Sheri Jo had been sexually assaulted. She had been shot 4 times. And the medical evidence indicated she had likely been kept alive for as long as 3 days after her abduction. Before she died from blood loss. 3 days. That single detail changed the shape of the entire case. This was not a sudden killing carried out and abandoned. Her attacker had held her, controlled her, and remained with her across a stretch of time measured in days rather than minutes. For the family searching frantically during those very hours, the implication was almost too heavy to bear. Somewhere nearby, their daughter may still have been alive, while every knock on a door and every phone call led nowhere. In 1983, forensic science operated under limits that are hard to picture today. There was physical evidence at the scene, including biological material left behind by the attacker. But the means to turn that material into an actual name simply did not exist. DNA profiling was still in its earliest days, and the large genetic databases that investigators lean on now were many years from being built, so the evidence was gathered, labeled, and locked away. Detectives followed leads, questioned neighbors, and assembled thick files. Then the leads went cold. Months stretched into years, and years hardened into decades. The case sank into the category every investigator learns to dread. For 4 decades, that folder waited in storage, holding the answer inside it, waiting patiently for a science that had not yet been invented on the day Sheri Jo died. That science eventually arrived, and it brought an unlikely group of people together. In 2023, the Michigan State Police teamed up with a private forensics company called Othram Labs, along with students from the Cold Case program at Western Michigan University. Their assignment was to revive a case that had gone cold long before most of them were born. The first step was unglamorous. Decades of paper files had to be scanned, digitized, sorted, and organized, so the information could be searched and cross-referenced. Only then could the surviving biological evidence be run through forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that compares crime scene DNA against public family trees, to trace a suspect through his living relatives. The work moved slowly and demanded patience, and it was about to show that the sharpest tool in a cold case is not always a machine in a lab. A large share of that labor landed on college students. One of them, Hallie Warner, spent her scheduled class hours doing something almost no undergraduate ever has to face. She combed through graphic, decades-old evidence and police reports, one page at a time, working directly alongside state investigators. This was no classroom simulation or hypothetical exercise. The material was genuine, the victim had been a real teenager, and the killer, at that point, was still walking free. Bit by bit, the team reconstructed a profile of the man they were chasing. Their effort turned a mountain of aging, disorganized paper into a usable, searchable case file. And once the genetic material was finally compared against the family trees, one name climbed to the top of the list. The name was Ronnie Collins. By the time investigators identified him, he was 75 years old and living a calm, unremarkable life in Grand Blanc, Michigan. Back in 1983, when the murder took place, he had been 33. On paper, almost nothing about him matched. The picture people tend to hold of a violent predator. He carried no local reputation as a dangerous man. Instead, he was known as a familiar face in the regional music scene, a performer with an easy grin who often wore Michigan State clothing around town. Friends called him by a nickname borrowed from a famous guitarist. To nearly everyone who crossed his path, he was simply a talented neighbor with a warm personality. But the genetic science had pointed squarely at his family line, and the investigators understood they needed one final piece to be certain, a sample taken from the man himself. The distance between how Collins lived and what he had done is difficult to hold in the mind at the same time. For more than 4 decades, he moved through everyday life without drawing suspicion. He played his music. He built friendships. He was, by every outward measure, a warm and generous presence in the community. That split existence is exactly what makes the case so hard to absorb. The person capable of holding a teenage girl captive for days was the same person others trusted, welcomed into their homes and remembered with affection. When news of his death spread, friends flooded his online memorial pages with kind messages, describing him as a wonderful person and a skilled performer. Not one of them knew what the investigators had already assembled. The two versions of the same man had never collided until the moment the truth forced them together. Then came a turn that nearly slammed the door shut for good, before the police could formally request a voluntary DNA sample from Collins. He took his own life at his home in January of 2026. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he had slipped through their hands. A dead man cannot be questioned, cannot be arrested, and cannot be asked to hand over a sample. Whatever confidence the investigators had built through genetic genealogy, they still lacked the direct, physical proof that would tie him to the scene beyond any argument. He appeared to have carried his secret into the grave, precisely as he seemed to intend. But death does not undo biology, and the law in Michigan handed the investigators one more path forward, one that Collins could no longer block. During his autopsy, police collected a DNA sample directly from Collins' body. That sample was then compared against the biological material left on Sheri Jo Elliott back in 1983. The outcome left no room for doubt. It was a match. The evidence that had waited since that November in 1983 finally received its answer, drawn from the very man who believed he had escaped. His decision to end the story on his own terms became the exact thing that locked his identity in place. The sample he could no longer refuse to provide confirmed what the students and the detectives had come to suspect. The friendly musician from the Flint music scene had taken and killed a 16-year-old girl. On April 13th, 2026, the Michigan State Police stood before the public and named Ronnie Collins as the person who murdered Sheri Jo Elliott. The case, unsolved for 43 years, was officially closed. There would be no trial because there was no living defendant left to face one. Collins was never arrested, never convicted inside a courtroom, and never sentenced by any judge. In place of a verdict, the science spoke on the victim's behalf. The announcement delivered a strange form of resolution, the kind that answers the central question while leaving the deeper wound wide open. A grieving family finally had a name to attach to their loss, but the man who owed them an explanation was already gone, and the answers they might have wanted from his own mouth would never arrive. Solving one mystery pried open another, Once the DNA match was confirmed, investigators shifted their focus to a case older still than Sheri Joe's. On Halloween night in 1969, 2 teenagers from Oscoda, Michigan, disappeared without a trace. Their names were Pamela Hobley, 15, and Patricia Spencer, 16. Police have since placed Collins in Oscoda on the very night the girls vanished, driving a white van, and using the same nickname his friends knew him by. That evidence has made him a person of interest in their disappearance. Investigators chose their words carefully here, and for good reason. Those files remain open and active, and Collins was never charged in connection with them. Still, the pattern has prompted a renewed public appeal for information, and it has reopened wounds that had stayed painfully quiet for more than 50 years. Behind every part of this story stands the family that endured the silence the longest. Sheri Joe was an only child. 1 year after the murder, her mother, Joyce Elliott, spoke to a local newspaper, still desperate for anyone who might have seen something that morning. She said it seemed impossible that her daughter could simply vanish without being seen by a single soul. And she reminded readers that Sheri Joe was the only child she had. Those words captured what so many years of waiting truly meant. Not a case number, not a dusty file on a shelf, but a mother who only wanted her daughter to come home. The genealogy, the student volunteers, and the final DNA match all served that one deeply human need. The need to know, at last, what had happened. The case leaves behind a quiet lesson about how far into the past the present can now reach. For most of Sheri Joe's story, the tools required to name her killer had not yet been invented. The people who might have solved it in 1983 were working almost entirely in the dark. What eventually changed the outcome was not a lucky break, but the steady arrival of new science, joined with the patience of ordinary people, including students who chose to spend their hours immersed in painful files. A man concealed himself for over 4 decades and nearly outlasted the clock. In the end, a sample taken after his death accomplished what no interrogation ever could. In evidence rooms across the country, older folders still sit and wait, and the story of Sheri Joe Elliott stands as a steady reminder that waiting, today, is no longer the same thing as forgetting.